It's Charter Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerantz, and we are in Signal Hill. And I want our guest, Gerrie Schipske, to tell us about Signal Hill because she is the local historian. She's so many things. You know her. She was on the Long Beach City Council, termed out recently. She is now a columnist for the Long Beach Business Journal. But honestly, since we are in Signal Hill on a modified roadshow, tell us about it.
Absolutely. This is where Long Beach became rich. This is where they discovered oil. And actually, Signal Hill was part of Long Beach.
Right.
And it moved to incorporate it and put a tax on the oil that it had just found. And the oil companies helped the local residents and say nay, nay, and they fought off incorporation. And they became a 5-mile square city that's totally surrounded by Long Beach.
But why did Long Beach let them go?
Long Beach at that point had no choice. The voters chose to do it. And
Interesting.
now the city, who tries to do the incorporation, has the owners. They've changed the law about incorporations for that reason. But Long Beach was gobbling up a lot of land at the time, and they wanted this particularly because it had a lot of oil.
Well, let's talk about an issue that is percolating elsewhere. This time in the California Supreme Court. Who would have thunk that this issue would march all the way through the courts and get us to the highest court in the Golden State? And it deals with, it's a great issue. You're a lawyer, right?
Right.
And a nurse and a professor and it deals
Firstborn,
with,
Capricorn,
right, exactly, who would have thunk? And it deals with the question of communications about public matters of public officials, but on their private email account.
Which is very timely because we have a presidential race.
Right.
And we keep hearing about these emails that were on a private server. The reality is that in San Jose, there was a gentleman by the name of Mr. Smith who was very upset about some development that was going on. And so under the Brown Act, as well as some other laws for public records, he said, I want to see all the records, all the correspondence that went on between the elected officials and the developers.
Right.
Well, they produced records, but they were all the government type of records that came off the government servers. And he said, no, I want the emails, and he actually pushed for text messages. And the city fought back and said, oh no, those are private records, they're not public.
But so, if you're writing from Gerrie Schipske at longbeach.gov, that there's no question.
There's no question.
Okay,
However,
but if it's your personal email, that's the question.
Well, it's not only just personal email, but if the argument was that if you did it from your home computer and not the government server, then that also should be discoverable.
Even if you're using longbeach.gov?
Yes. And so he said, look, I want everything. And the city said, we'll give you those things that are on the city server. Because quite honestly, Brad, when I was in city council, if someone did a public records request, the way they were given access was if we had it on our computer on our desk in the office there at council.
But let me ask you, I would think if you emailed from sanjose.gov or longbeach.gov, wherever you are, wouldn't that wind up on a city server?
Well, you would think, and it does, but cities don't necessarily enforce saving them. And we had this issue in Long Beach because we would get public records requests. They'd say we want all the emails, and then we'd hear from the city attorney. The city attorney would say, do you have anything on your desktop? And my question had been at the time, well, doesn't the city do backup and mirror? No, we don't. We don't. So apparently they clean out emails. So that's
another issue.
That's a whole
and an important issue.
That's a whole other issue. But because of technology, because of Twitter, because of social media, people in elected office frequently use their handheld devices and they communicate and they make decisions.
But let's play law school for a second. If I were a law professor and I was presented this fact pattern, I would say, if you've sent it from sanjose.gov, wherever you are, that's discoverable. Do you think that's fair?
I absolutely agree. The key there is then you've got to find out who's retaining it.
Right.
So that's an entirely different issue.
But then the question becomes, if you're sending it from
GerrieSchipske.com,
I mean, the question then is, did you intentionally send it from GerrieSchipske.com to avoid public records? Or could it be, look, sometimes, I have so many emails, I don't know from where I'm sending it.
But in that case, in fact, I often would get things sent directly from constituents to schipske@gmail.com. So when I responded, I'd always CC my city email so that it went into the city system. And up in San Jose, they're not doing that. And I would say in most cities, they're not. And
even if you CC'd at longbeach.gov.
If you CC at longbeach.gov, then to me, you put it in the public
Right.
record domain and people should get a copy
Right.
of it. If you don't CC it, then you and I are carrying on a conversation that violates the Brown Act, because the Brown Act says we get to see the deliberations between the elected officials and others
But
on
here's
an
the question. I mean, we're old enough to remember a world without email.
Right.
And so
Right.
those would, in the olden days,
Right.
they would have been conversations
Well, yeah.
that could not have been discoverable because we're not recording our conversations.
No, but that's right, but that's why the Brown Act came about in the 60s. It was because of that kind of behavior that was occurring. And in fact, there's a prohibition against what's called serial media.
No, that I'm aware.
I meet
yeah.
with you, I meet with him, and we come to consensus. The public didn't see that consensus.
But then what about negotiation? See, that's my concern. I've said this before. You know, look.
It should be in the public, and that
But then
I'm a little bit of a purist because
I know,
I
I'm
would
not.
get people coming to me and they say, "Oh, come on, I'm sure you guys work out deals on the side. Can't you work a deal on this?" I said, "No, we can't, because if we get to a majority, if we have a quorum in our conversations, we have violated the Brown Act."
But you know, I'm getting philosophical now, but isn't politics about the art of the negotiation?
Local government, I think, is much different. We are not Congress. Congress deliberates and does things in an entirely different fashion. We're local government. We're the closest to the people. And the purpose of the Brown Act says quite clearly that it is in the interest of the people to see how government is deliberated.
Well, but what do you think
to
about
watch it.
that? I'm just wondering, I know what the Brown Act says, but is it in the best interest of effective government to preclude you from talking to your colleagues about a matter?
Well, I think you can talk to a couple of them. You just want to make sure you don't violate. We had a councilman the other day who did this.
Right.
He was texting people about naming the library after Michelle
Right.
Obama.
But let me ask you, let's say the Brown Act doesn't exist.
Right.
I just wonder whether it minimizes effective government that you can't have conversations.
But set that issue aside for a second. The bigger issue right now in front of the Supreme Court is
Fair enough.
the records that are generated by those conversations. Yeah, if you want that ability to talk, I want to see what you discussed.
So let's go back. I digress.
I want to see. No.
Yeah.
But that's part and parcel.
Yeah.
That is the argument.
Yeah.
Well, you know, there are some things that are sensitive. Well, when you're in local government, you don't have privacy.
But here's the question. So let's say the Supreme Court rules that,
It's going to be huge.
right, well, let's say they rule that if you have a public conversation about a public matter on your private email, it's discoverable.
Right.
How is that going to work? I mean,
That was the argument, and that
Right.
at the lower court level, that was the argument, and that's why it wound up getting appealed by
Right.
Mr. Smith. They said it would be near impossible.
Right.
You would have to trust the elected officials
Right.
that they would automatically turn over. I would say to you, what you do is you put in place policies at your council that says, and they did in San Jose for most elected officials, all elected officials on certain issues and some of their staff. This went beyond that. You say, anytime you do generate anything that has to do with the public business of the city, you have to CC
Right.
it to the city server.
what about if it does rule, the court does rule in a way that private email accounts become discoverable?
If you use it for public business.
But what about truly private conversations on that email account?
No, and that's we see someone running for president who's
Right.
having that same dilemma, is that there were some very private things that happened in those emails that were not directly related to
Right, but
public
wasn't
matters.
she was using a government email, just a private server?
But I will tell you, you can do that any place. I mean, you can have your mail forwarded to you.
Right.
So if I have a laptop in the city of Long Beach, and that's how I answer all my mail, and I carry that with me. When someone comes and asks for that email, they only check the desktops downtown.
You're going to come back and you're going to tell us what happens with this
Well,
decision.
we're waiting on this. This has been there for 2 years.
Wow.
This is a huge decision coming.
She is Gerrie Schipske. I'm Brad Pomerantz in Signal Hill, California. This is Charter Local Edition.